I tasted the bitter almonds before the ceramic even touched my lips. Last time I drank it, trusted him, and died convulsing on my own Persian rug. This time, I switched the cups. My husband is smiling at me. He doesn't know he's about to drink his own murder. Death doesn't feel like going to sleep. It feels like drowning in battery acid. When my eyes snapped open, my hands were clamped around my own throat. I was gasping, pulling in lungfuls of stale, dust-moated air. My fingernails dug into the soft flesh of my neck, drawing blood. There was no bright light, no angelic choir, no sudden wash of serene understanding. There was only the harsh fluorescent glare of the kitchen pendant light and the hum of the refrigerator. I scrambled backward on the linoleum, my back hitting the baseboards. I was alive. My throat didn't burn. My stomach wasn't seizing into a tight, agonizing knot. I dragged myself up using the edge of the granite counter. My reflection in the microwave door was a distorted, pale mess. Mascara smudged beneath my eyes. A stray piece of hair stuck to the sweat on my cheek. I looked at the digital clock on the stove. 4:12 p.m. I looked at the calendar pinned to the corkboard. October 14th. It was the same day. The day I died. A sharp, hysterical laugh caught in my chest, sounding more like a cough. I wasn't in hell. And I wasn't in heaven. I was in my kitchen in the Chicago suburbs. 3 hours before my husband, Julian, would hand me a cup of Earl Grey laced with enough cyanide to drop a horse. I didn't immediately formulate a master plan. I didn't feel a surge of righteous vengeance. I threw up in the sink. The sour taste of bile mixed with the phantom memory of bitter almonds. I ran the garbage disposal, the grinding noise loud enough to drown out the ringing in my ears. Why was I back? How? I didn't care. The only thing that mattered was the heavy, suffocating weight of knowing exactly what the man I'd been married to for 6 years was capable of. At 5:30 p.m., the front door unlocked. The deadbolt gave its familiar heavy click. Clara. Julian's voice floated down the hallway, smooth, resonant. A voice built for selling commercial real estate and lying to his wife. In the kitchen, I called back. My voice sounded thin, brittle. I cleared my throat, forcing a swallow past the lump of terror lodging there. Julian rounded the corner. He was taking off his camel hair coat, the shoulders damp from the October drizzle. He smelled like wet wool, expensive cedarwood cologne, and beneath it all, the sharp metallic tang of the city subway. He looked painfully ordinary. The slight thinning of his blonde hair at the temples, the small shaving nick on his jaw. This was the face that had hovered over me while I choked on my own blood, watching me with the clinical detachment of a boy burning an ant with a magnifying glass. "Smells good in here," he said, stepping into the kitchen. He leaned in to kiss my cheek. I didn't flinch, but it took every ounce of muscular control I possessed. His lips were dry. The scratch of his 5 o'clock shadow grazed my skin. "Roast chicken," I said, turning quickly back to the cutting board. "Your favorite. You shouldn't have gone to the trouble, darling. We could have ordered in. And ruin your schedule. I thought." I chopped a carrot. The knife hit the wooden block with a rhythmic thwack. 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 My hands were shaking. I focused on the orange rounds of the carrot, watching them pile up. "I wanted to cook," I said. Julian lingered for a moment, his presence a heavy, oppressive mass in the room. "I'm going to change. I'll open a bottle of the Cabernet." Perfect. When his footsteps faded up the stairs, I slumped against the counter. My knees felt like water. I wanted to run. I could grab my purse, my keys, walk out into the rain, and never come back. But he would find me. Julian was meticulous. He had drained my savings, isolated me from my sister, and tied my name to his failing shell companies. If I ran, I'd be a destitute fugitive, and he'd play the heartbroken abandoned husband. No. At 6:45 p.m., the chicken was resting. The smell of rosemary and roasted garlic filled the house. A warm domestic blanket thrown over a crime scene. Julian came back down wearing a soft cashmere sweater. He poured the wine. We stood in the kitchen sipping. "I'll get the tea ready," he said, setting his wine glass down. "For after dinner." This was it. The ritual. "Okay," I said, turning to the sink to wash the cutting board. I kept my back to him, but my eyes darted to the reflective surface of the dark kitchen window. I watched his distorted reflection. He pulled the 2 identical bone china teacups from the cabinet. He set them on the tray. He poured the hot water over the infusers. Then he paused. He looked toward my back. I kept scrubbing the clean cutting board, the sponge foaming with soap. In the reflection, I saw his hand dip into his pocket. He brought out something small, a little paper packet. He hovered over the cup on the left, the one with the tiny chip on the gold rim. My cup. He tipped the packet. I couldn't hear the powder fall, but my mind supplied the sickening hiss of it dissolving into the boiling water. He stirred it, his movements unhurried, casual, like he was adding a lump of sugar. "Can you grab the napkins from the dining room?" Julian asked, his voice steady. "Sure," I said. I dried my hands on a towel. I walked out of the kitchen into the dim dining room. I counted to 3. 1, 2, 3. "Julian," I called out. "Did you put them in the sideboard or the middle drawer?" "Middle drawer," he yelled back. "I'll come look." I heard his footsteps cross the kitchen linoleum toward the pantry area. That was my window. 3 seconds. I slipped back into the kitchen through the swinging butler's door. The tea tray sat on the island. Steam coiled up from the dark amber liquid. The cup with the chipped gold rim was on the left. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. My palms were sweating so badly I was afraid I'd drop them. I reached out. I grabbed the saucer on the left. I grabbed the saucer on the right. I switched them. The hot porcelain burned the pads of my fingers. But I didn't let go. A single drop of tea sloshed over the rim of Julian's cup, now my cup, and hit the silver tray. Damn it. I snatched a paper towel, dabbed the droplet, and shoved the damp paper into my pocket just as the swinging door opened. "They were in the sideboard," Julian said, holding up a stack of linen napkins. He looked at me. I was standing too close to the island. My breathing was shallow, rapid. "Right." I forced a smile. My face felt frozen, the muscles tight. Silly me. Julian looked at the tray. He looked at the cups. He looked back at me. "Everything all right, Clara? You look pale." "Just tired," I said, walking past him to take the napkins. "Let's eat." The dining room felt like a tomb. The heavy mahogany table, an antique Julian had insisted on buying at auction, stretched between us. Above, the crystal chandelier cast fractured, prismatic shadows across our plates. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Every second felt like a physical blow. I stared at my plate. The crispy skin of the chicken, the roasted potatoes glistening with duck fat. I picked up my silver fork. It felt strangely heavy, cold against my warm, clammy skin. "The chicken is dry," Julian said. I looked up. He was chewing slowly, his jaw shifting side to side. He chewed with his mouth slightly open, a wet clicking sound I had spent 6 years ignoring, pretending it was just a quirk. Tonight, it made me want to scream. "I left it in too long," I murmured, cutting a piece I had no intention of eating. "It's fine. Just noticeable." He took a sip of his Cabernet. The dark red liquid stained his lips for a fraction of a second before he licked it away. "So, I spoke with the travel agent today." "Oh." My voice was hollow. "About Tuscany," he said, leaning forward, resting his elbows on the table. He smiled. It was the same smile that had bought me a diamond ring in a crowded restaurant years ago. Now, it just looked like a tear in his face, a rehearsed arrangement of facial muscles. "We're booked for the villa in November. I think it'll be good for us, Clara. A fresh start. We've been so distant lately. A fresh start." I looked at him. Truly looked at him. The sheer audacity. He was sitting there chewing his dry chicken, spinning a lie about a romantic getaway in Italy, knowing full well that in less than an hour he would be dialing 911, doing his best impression of a hysterical husband who just found his wife dead of a sudden, tragic heart failure. He had probably already packed up my expensive jewelry in his mind, deciding what to sell to cover his gambling debts. A wave of nausea hit me so violent I had to grip the edge of the table to keep from doubling over. "Are you okay?" Julian asked. His brow furrowed. Genuine concern. No. He was just monitoring his investment. He needed me alive for another 40 minutes. Fine. I croaked. I reached for my wine and drained half the glass in one swallow. The alcohol burned its way down, settling like a hot coal in my stomach. Just cramps. Drink some water, he advised gently. I nodded, staring at the grain of the wood on the table. I was terrified. The bravado of switching the cups was fading, replaced by a creeping, icy dread. What if I was wrong? What if I was having a psychotic break? What if my memory of dying was just an ultra-realistic nightmare? A symptom of a tumor or a stroke? And the powder he put in the tea was just Splenda. If I let him drink it and it was just tea, nothing would happen. But if it was poison, I was about to watch a man die. I wasn't a killer. I was an interior decorator who liked watching bad reality TV and drinking too much Pinot Grigio on Fridays. I couldn't handle the sight of roadkill, let alone murder. My chest tightened. Maybe I should knock his cup over. Pretend I tripped. Spill the tea. Ruin the plan. Run away. And then what? The cynical voice in my head whispered. He tries again tomorrow. He pushes you down the stairs. He cuts the brake lines on your car. He doesn't stop. Clara. He needs the money. You're very quiet tonight, Julian observed. He had finished his plate and was wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. I'm just thinking about Tuscany. I lied, forcing my eyes to meet his. It sounds breathtaking. It will be, he promised softly. He stood up, gathering his empty plates in mine. I hadn't eaten a single bite. I'll get the tea, he said. I sat alone in the dining room. The grandfather clock ticked. Tick. Tock. I rubbed my thumbs together, feeling the dry friction of my skin. My heart was beating so fast my vision pulsed with it. The edges of the room blurred. From the kitchen, I heard the clink of porcelain on silver. He was coming. The door swung open. Julian stepped through, carrying the tray. He set it down in the center of the table with a soft thud. 2 cups. Steam rising. He picked up the cup with the chipped gold rim. He walked around the table and set it down in front of me. Careful. It's hot, he murmured, his hand resting briefly on my shoulder. His fingers squeezed, a gesture of affection that sent a jolt of pure revulsion down my spine. He walked back to his seat and sat down. He pulled the remaining cup toward him. Smells strong, I noted, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to lock down my vocal cords. I let it steep a bit longer, Julian said easily. Brings out the bergamot. I stared at the dark liquid in my cup. The chip on the rim mocked me. I had swapped them. I knew I had swapped them. But the paranoid, frantic part of my brain screamed, did you? Are you sure? What if you swapped them back in your panic? To us. Clara, Julian said. He raised his cup, holding it by the delicate little handle, his pinky slightly extended. The picture of refined elegance. I wrapped both my hands around my cup to hide the shaking. I raised it an inch off the saucer. To us. I whispered. Julian didn't hesitate. He brought the cup to his lips and took a long, steady pull. He swallowed. I brought my cup to my mouth, letting the hot ceramic touch my bottom lip. But I kept my teeth clenched shut. I didn't let a single drop pass my lips. I lowered the cup back to the saucer with a clatter that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. Julian set his cup down. He sighed, a contented sound. Perfect temperature. I didn't say anything. I just watched him. 10 seconds passed. He reached for his napkin, folding it into a neat square. 20 seconds. He looked at me, a slight frown forming. Clara, you aren't drinking. I'm letting it cool, I said. My voice sounded distant, like it was coming from underwater. 30 seconds. Julian opened his mouth to speak, but instead of words, a small, sharp hiccup came out. He blinked, looking surprised. He cleared his throat. Excuse me, he muttered. 40 seconds. He reached out to adjust his cup on the saucer, but his hand missed. His fingers knocked against the side of the cup, rattling it. He pulled his hand back, staring at his own fingers as if they didn't belong to him. Julian, I breathed. I was gripping the edges of my chair so hard my knuckles were white. He started. His voice was suddenly thick. Gravelly. I feel strange. A sudden, violent spasm racked his chest. He coughed, a wet, tearing sound. His hand shot up to his throat, mirroring the exact posture I had woken up in hours ago. It was happening. God help me. It was really happening. Julian's chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor as he tried to push himself backward. He half stood, but his legs simply gave out. He collapsed back into the chair, his head lolling to the side. His eyes met mine. They were wide, dilated, swimming with sudden, profound panic. The mask of the charming husband dissolved in an instant, replaced by the raw, unadulterated terror of a dying animal. Clara, he gasped. The smell hit me then. It wasn't the scent of roasted chicken or expensive cologne anymore. It was the sharp, undeniable reek of bitter almonds radiating from his breath, filling the space between us. He lunged across the table. His flailing arm caught his teacup. It flew off the edge, shattering against the floorboards, a splash of amber liquid soaking into the rug. His hand clamped around my wrist. His grip was terrifyingly strong. His skin was already growing clammy, his face flushing a bizarre, unnatural shade of cherry red. Help! He wheezed, spit flying from his lips and landing on my cheek. Help me! I should have felt triumphant. I should have stood up, looked down at him, and delivered some icy one-liner about karma. But I didn't. I was horrified. Tears sprang to my eyes, blurring his agonizing contortions. It was ugly. It was so incredibly ugly. His jaw gaped open, straining for oxygen that his cells could no longer process. He was suffocating from the inside out. His eyes fixed on my face, begged for a mercy I couldn't give him, a mercy he hadn't given me. I started, but my voice broke into a sob. I pulled my wrist, trying to break his grip, but his fingers were locked like a vice. Let go of me. He didn't hear me. His pupils were blown wide, consuming the iris. Another convulsion seized him, snapping his back into an arch. He slid out of the chair, dragging my arm down with him. I stumbled out of my seat, falling to my knees on the floor beside him. He was twitching on the Persian rug. The same rug. Julian. I cried, the sound pathetic and broken. I was terrified of him, terrified of what I had done. Terrified of the loud rattling sounds coming from his throat. His hands suddenly went slack, falling away from my wrist. His heels drummed against the floorboards for a few agonizing seconds. A dark stain began to spread across the front of his gray slacks as his bladder let go. The smell of urine mingled with the bitter almonds, a sickening, deeply human stench that made me gag violently. I scrambled backward on my hands and knees, crab walking away from him until my back hit the heavy wooden leg of the sideboard. I sat there panting, staring at the body of my husband. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling. He was completely still. The grandfather clock ticked. Tick, tock, tick, tock. There was no music swelling in the background. No sense of closure. Just me sitting on the floor in a puddle of spilled tea, surrounded by shattered porcelain, breathing in the smell of death and voided bowels. I wrapped my arms around my knees and pulled them to my chest. I rocked back and forth, a low keening moan escaping my lips. I survived. I was alive. But as I stared at the dead man on my floor, the terrible, crushing reality of the aftermath settled over me like a suffocating blanket. I was a widow. I was a killer. And I had a dead body in my dining room that I now had to explain to the police. I reached into my pocket with trembling fingers and pulled out the crumpled paper towel, still damp with the single drop of poison tea. The nightmare wasn't over. It had just changed shape. The silence in the house was heavier than the ticking clock. It pressed against my eardrums, thick and suffocating. On the floor, Julian didn't look like a husband anymore. He looked like an object. A broken mechanism leaking fluids onto expensive wool. My fingers were slick with cold sweat as I pulled my phone from my back pocket. I stared at the dark screen. My reflection stared back, hollow eyes. A smudge of mascara dragged across my cheekbone like a bruise. I unlocked it. The keypad glared up at me. 911, my thumb hovered over the green call button. I needed a story. No, I didn't need a story. I just needed to tell the truth minus 3 seconds of swapped porcelain. I pressed the button and held the phone to my ear. It rang twice. 911, what is your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was aggressively calm. A flat Midwestern drone. I didn't have to fake the tremor in my voice. The terror was a physical entity trapped in my throat. My husband, he's on the floor. He isn't breathing. Ma'am, what is your address? I rattled off the numbers, my teeth chattering so hard I nearly bit my tongue. Okay, help is on the way. Did he fall? Is he conscious? No. We were having tea and he started coughing. He couldn't breathe. His eyes rolled back. He peed himself. He's just lying here. I was sobbing now. A wet, ugly sound that tore out of my chest. I wasn't crying for Julian. I was crying for the girl who had died on this road yesterday. The girl who had loved him enough to drink whatever he handed her. Ma'am, I need you to stay on the line. Are you able to perform CPR? I don't know how. I lied. I had taken a course 2 years ago when we were trying for a baby that never came. The thought of putting my mouth over his, tasting the residual bitter almonds, made the roast chicken I hadn't eaten threaten to come up. He's completely still. He's turning blue. Don't move him. The paramedics are 2 minutes out. I lowered the phone, putting it on speaker, and placed it on the dining table next to the unbroken teacup. Then I remembered the paper towel. My hand shot to my pocket. The damp, crumpled square was still there, holding the single drop of poison tea that had spilled during the swap. If the police found it on me, if they tested it, I scrambled up, my knees cracking loudly in the quiet room. I ran to the powder room off the hallway. My reflection in the vanity mirror was feral. I threw the paper towel into the toilet, hit the silver flush lever, and watched the water swirl and swallow it down. I turned on the faucet. The water was icy. I scrubbed my hands with the cheap, synthetic lavender soap I kept for guests. I scrubbed until my knuckles were red, trying to wash away the phantom heat of the teacups, the sensation of Julian's dying grip on my wrist. I rinsed my face, the cold water shocking my system out of its frantic spiral. Through the small frosted window, red and blue lights began to stroke the rain-slicked pavement outside. The sirens wailed, cutting abruptly as the ambulance and a cruiser pulled into the driveway. I walked slowly out of the bathroom. I went to the front door and pulled it open just as a paramedic raised his fist to knock. In there. I pointed toward the dining room, my arm shaking violently. Please. 2 paramedics rushed past me, their heavy boots squeaking on the hardwood. A uniformed police officer followed, his hand resting casually on his utility belt. The radio on his shoulder crackled with static. I didn't follow them into the dining room. I stood in the foyer, wrapping my arms tight around my rib cage, pressing my back against the wall. The cold plaster seeped through my thin blouse. Sir, can you hear me? A paramedic shouted. A moment later, a different voice. No pulse. Pupils are fixed and dilated. Get the pads on him. Clear. A dull thump echoed from the dining room. My stomach rolled. They were trying to shock a dead heart back to life, a heart poisoned by cyanide. Nothing. Asystole. He's gone. Man. The uniformed officer stepped back out into the hallway. He looked at me, his expression softening from professional alertness to practiced sympathy. He reached out and gently touched my elbow. Ma'am, why don't we step into the kitchen? I nodded mutely. I let him guide me away from the dining room, away from the smell. The kitchen still smelled like rosemary and garlic. The remaining roast chicken sat on the counter, cooling in its own congealed fat. It looked grotesque now. My name is Officer Malloy, he said softly. A detective is on his way. Can I get you some water? No. I whispered. I sank into one of the island stools, the same island where I had swapped the cups. The realization sent a fresh, sharp spike of adrenaline straight into my blood. Within 20 minutes, the house was swarming. The quiet domesticity of my home was obliterated by the clinical machinery of a death investigation. Crime scene technicians in paper booties walked across my rugs. The flash of a camera popped repeatedly in the dining room, a strobe light illuminating Julian's corpse from a dozen different angles. Detective Reeves introduced himself. He was a broad-shouldered man in a cheap gray suit, smelling strongly of black coffee and peppermint gum. He had kind, tired eyes. But the way he looked at the kitchen, taking in the wine glasses, the cutting board, the tray, told me he didn't miss a single detail. "Mrs. Pendleton, I am incredibly sorry for your loss," he said, pulling out a small spiral notebook. "I know this is the hardest night of your life, but I need to ask you a few questions to understand what happened here." "Okay," I said. I pulled a tissue from the box on the counter and dabbed at my nose. "Can you walk me through the evening? Start from when he got home." I told him the truth. Most of it. It's easier to remember a lie if it's anchored to reality. I told him about the chicken, the wine, the conversation about Tuscany. He said we needed a fresh start. I told the detective, my voice cracking perfectly. He went to the kitchen to make tea. Earl Grey. We always have it after dinner. "Did you come into the kitchen with him?" Reeves asked, his pen pausing. "No." I lied smoothly. "I stayed in the dining room. I was tired." He brought the tray out. And then, he handed me my cup. He sat down. He took a drink. And then he started coughing. He dropped his cup. It broke on the floor. He grabbed his chest and fell out of the chair. I squeezed my eyes shut, letting fresh tears squeeze through my lashes. It happened so fast. Was it a heart attack? He was only 38. Reeves didn't answer immediately. He looked toward the swinging door of the dining room. "We won't know until the medical examiner takes a look," Reeves said gently. "You didn't drink your tea." "No. It was too hot." "Mrs. Pendleton." A voice called from the doorway. A woman in a dark windbreaker over scrubs stepped into the kitchen, the medical examiner investigator. "We're going to be transporting your husband's body shortly. Detective, can I see you for a second?" Reeves excused himself. They stood in the hallway, their voices lowered to a murmur. I strained to listen, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Cyanosis around the lips," the woman was saying. "And the smell. It's faint, but it's there." The uniform caught it, too. "Almonds?" Reeves asked, his voice tight. "Yeah. And look at this." I heard the rustle of a plastic evidence bag. Found this folded up in his right trouser pocket. Looks like an empty wax paper packet. There's a white residue inside. I stopped breathing. The packet. He had put the empty cyanide packet back into his pocket after he poured it into the cup. He was probably planning to flush it down the toilet after I died. "Have forensics bag the unbroken cup and scrape the floorboards where the other one shattered," Reeves commanded quietly. "I want everything off that table tested." Reeves walked back into the kitchen. His demeanor had subtly shifted. The practiced sympathy was still there, but a sharp analytical edge had cut through it. "Mrs. Pendleton," he said, sitting down on the stool next to mine. "Has your husband been depressed lately? Any financial troubles? Changes in behavior?" They thought it was suicide. I let out a shaky breath, staring at my hands. We have some debt. The business hasn't been doing well." He was stressed. "But he wouldn't do this. He just booked a trip to Italy. He wouldn't. People hide their pain well, ma'am," Reeves said softly. He had no idea. The interrogation didn't happen in a sterile room with a two-way mirror. It happened in my own living room, sitting on the beige sectional sofa I had picked out 3 years ago. A female officer draped a scratchy wool blanket over my shoulders. I was shivering uncontrollably, the adrenaline crash hitting my nervous system like a sledgehammer. Reeves asked me the same questions 3 different ways. "Did you prepare the tea? Did you touch the cups? Which cup was yours?" "The one on the left," I answered, staring blankly at the unlit fireplace. "With the chip on the gold rim. That's always been my cup." He put it down in front of me. "And he took the other one?" "Yes." Reeves rubbed his jaw, the stubble making a rasping sound. "Mrs. Pendleton, the preliminary finding, and mind you, this has to be confirmed by the lab, suggests your husband ingested a lethal dose of a toxic substance. Likely cyanide." I gasped. A real, genuine gasp of shock. I brought my hand to my mouth. "Poison. No. No. That's impossible. He just drank his tea." "We found an empty packet in his pocket," Reeves said, watching my face closely. "It appears he put the substance into his own cup." I shook my head violently, burying my face in my hands. I don't understand. Why would he do that in front of me? Why would he tell me about Italy and then kill himself? That's what we're trying to figure out, Reeves said. He hesitated, shifting his weight on the sofa cushion. Is there any possibility, Mrs. Pendleton, that the cups were mixed up? My breath hitched. This was the moment, the knife edge between freedom and a prison cell. I looked up at him, my eyes wide, red, and swollen. Mixed up? If he intended to harm you instead of himself. I let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Julian kill me? Why? I don't have any money. Everything is in his name. The house. The business. I have nothing. He was my whole life. It was the perfect defense because it was the absolute truth. Julian had ensured on paper that I was entirely dependent on him. He had stripped me of my autonomy so thoroughly that the police could find absolutely no financial motive for me to want him dead. Nor any reason for him to want me dead, unless they dug deep enough into his shell companies to find the life insurance policy he had forced me to sign 3 months ago. And they would find it. Eventually. When they found the $3 million policy, the puzzle pieces would snap together for Detective Reeves. A desperate man drowning in debt. A massive insurance payout on his wife. A quiet dinner at home. A cup of poisoned tea. The cops would look at the evidence, Julian's fingerprints on the packet in his pocket, Julian pouring the tea, Julian serving it. They would conclude he was a bumbling, nervous killer who accidentally grabbed the wrong cup in his panic. A poetic, tragic accident. They would never suspect the terrified, weeping widow had known it was coming. Because how could she? I'm sorry to even suggest it, Reeves said gently, closing his notebook. We're just exploring all angles. You can't stay here tonight, Mrs. Pendleton. The house is a crime scene until forensics clears it tomorrow. I'll go to a hotel. I whispered. Do you have family you can call? My sister. I said. In Seattle. The sister Julian had systematically alienated me from. The sister who hadn't spoken to me in 2 years because Julian convinced me she was trying to ruin our marriage. Call her, Reeves advised. I packed a small overnight bag under the watchful eye of a female deputy. I grabbed a pair of jeans, 2 sweaters, and my toiletry bag. As I walked out the front door, the coroner's van was parked on the curb. 2 men were rolling a gurney down my front walkway. A heavy black body bag was strapped to it. I didn't look away. I watched the zipper of the bag reflect the glare of the street lights. The man inside that bag had planned to zip me into one just like it. I drove to a cheap motel off the interstate, 2 towns over. I didn't want to be anywhere near my neighborhood. I paid in cash at the bulletproof glass window. Room 114 smelled of stale cigarette smoke and industrial carpet cleaner. The bedspread was a faded, depressing floral pattern. I dropped my bag on the floor, locked the deadbolt, fastened the chain, and jammed the back of a wooden desk chair under the doorknob. I didn't turn on the overhead light. I walked to the window, parted the heavy, dust-caked curtains a fraction of an inch, and stared out at the parking lot. An 18-wheeler rumbled past on the highway, shaking the thin glass of the windowpane. I was alone. I walked into the cramped beige bathroom. The fluorescent light flickered, casting a sickly yellow hue over the peeling wallpaper. I turned on the shower, letting the water run until it steamed, fogging the cracked mirror. I stripped off my clothes, leaving them in a heap on the floor. I stepped into the tub. The water pressure was terrible, a weak drizzle that barely washed the soap from my skin. But the water was hot. I stood there for a long time, watching the water swirl down the rusty drain. I wasn't a hero. I hadn't exposed a criminal mastermind to the world. I hadn't delivered justice. I had just survived a lethal game of musical chairs by slipping the poison into his seat before the music stopped. I stepped out of the shower and wrapped myself in a scratchy, thin towel. I walked back into the dark bedroom and sat on the edge of the mattress. The springs groaned underneath me. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I reached over and looked at the screen. A text from Detective Reeves. Medical examiner confirmed cyanide. Still investigating the source. Please let us know if you need any resources or counseling. Get some rest. I locked the screen. I lay down on the bed, staring up at the popcorn ceiling. Tomorrow, I would have to call a lawyer. Tomorrow, I would have to endure the pitying looks of neighbors. Tomorrow, I would have to untangle the massive, rotting web of debt Julian had buried us in. I would have to fight the insurance company, fight the banks, fight to reclaim the life he had slowly siphoned away from me. It was going to be a brutal, exhausting mess. I was entirely alone, armed with nothing but a horrifying secret and a second chance I barely understood. But as I pulled the thin synthetic blanket up to my chin, a strange, unfamiliar sensation bloomed in my chest. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't triumph. It was the feeling of drawing a breath that didn't burn. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in 6 years, I fell asleep knowing I would wake up in the morning.